The West may think we couldn't find their listening base, but I did something that shocked America. For years, hidden in plain sight, disguised as a telecommunications facility, buried under layers of diplomatic agreements and classified partnerships in the heart of Ouagadougou. I found it, Trump. The CIA. Operating on our soil. Without our knowledge, our consent. Listening to everything. When my intelligence chief brought me the report, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I said, "You're telling me the Americans have been spying on us from inside our own capital?" He didn't laugh. He said, "Mr. President, for at least few years. Few years ago. While we held cabinet meetings, they listened. While we planned military operations, they recorded. While we negotiated with foreign partners, they knew our position before we spoke it. While we lived our lives, they watched." I looked at the evidence. Satellite images showing equipment that doesn't belong in a telecom facility. Manifest listing technology that has nothing to do with phone networks. Personnel records showing contractors rotating in and out on 3-month cycles. Diplomatic vehicles arriving at odd hours with no diplomatic purpose. And suddenly, everything made sense. The leaks that shouldn't have happened. The negotiations that went badly for no reason. The opposition that seemed to know our plans before we implemented them. The foreign governments that anticipated our moves before we made them. We weren't governing a sovereign nation. We were performing in a monitored theater. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office, staring at the files, asking myself one question: what do I do with this? Because exposing it meant war, not military war, economic war, diplomatic war, media war, the kind of war that destroys presidencies and collapses economies. But hiding it meant surrender. It meant accepting that Burkina Faso exists at the pleasure of foreign intelligence agencies. It meant admitting that our sovereignty is fiction. It meant teaching my children that dignity has a price, and sometimes that price is too high to pay. I called my wife. It was 3 a.m. She answered immediately because presidents' wives learn to sleep lightly. I said, "I found something that will change everything." She said, "Tell me." I told her. Everything. The facility. The surveillance, the years of violation, the choice I faced. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What does your heart tell you?" I said, "My heart tells me to fight, but my head tells me to calculate the cost." She said, "Your head will always find reasons to compromise. Your heart knows what's right. Listen to it." I said, "They'll destroy us economically. They'll isolate us diplomatically. They'll attack us in every international forum." She said, "Then we'll be destroyed with dignity instead of prospering with shame. Our children will inherit poverty with pride instead of wealth with humiliation." That conversation decided everything. Not the evidence, not the strategic calculations, not the political considerations, but a wife reminding her husband that some things matter more than comfort. I ordered the raid at dawn. No warning, no negotiation, no diplomatic courtesy. My security forces surrounded the facility at 5:30 a.m. The Americans inside panicked. They started destroying equipment, smashing hard drives, burning documents, erasing servers, frantically eliminating evidence. My commander called me. "Mr. President, they're destroying everything. Should we stop them?" I said, "Let them destroy what they can. We'll recover what remains. Their panic is evidence enough." We secured the facility by 7. By 8, my technical team was inside, recovering data from damaged equipment. By 9, we had enough evidence to prove what I already knew. But evidence wasn't the point. The point was the message. The point was showing Burkina Faso and showing Africa and showing the world that we found them, that we confronted them, that we refused to pretend we didn't know. I called the American ambassador. He arrived at noon, rehearsing his denials, preparing his diplomatic language, ready to explain and justify and minimize. I didn't let him speak. I slid a folder across the table. Inside are photographs of your facility, manifests of your equipment, records of your personnel, intercepts of your communications. I know everything. Don't insult me with lies. His face changed. The diplomatic mask cracked. He said, "Mr. President, this facility exists for regional security, to combat terrorism, to protect both our interests." I said, "Protect from whom? The only threat to Burkina Faso's security is sitting in my office right now." He tried a different approach. We have agreements, protocols. Previous administrations gave consent. I said, previous administrations sold what wasn't theirs to sell. My predecessor doesn't own Burkina Faso's sovereignty. I don't own it. The people own it. And the people didn't consent to being surveilled by foreign intelligence. He leaned forward, dropping the diplomatic pretense. Mr. President, if you go public with this, there will be consequences. Serious consequences. For your economy, for your international relationships, for your political future. And there it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the punishment disguised as warning, the violence hidden behind diplomatic language. I stood up. You have 72 hours. Remove your personnel. Remove your equipment. Remove every trace of your operation. Or I remove it for you, and I do it on live television. He said, you're making a mistake. I said, the mistake was made few years ago when you thought you could violate our sovereignty without consequences. I'm correcting it. He left without shaking my hand. Good. I don't shake hands with people who spy on me. That afternoon I called my cabinet. My ministers filed in nervous, sensing something significant was coming. I told them everything. The facility, the surveillance, the confrontation, the ultimatum, silence. The kind of silence that happens when people realize their entire reality just shifted. My finance minister spoke first. Mr. President, if you expose this publicly, the Americans will retaliate economically. We'll lose aid. We'll lose loans. We'll lose investment. I said, then we lose them. But we gain something more valuable. We gain the knowledge that we're not for sale. My foreign minister said, the international community will isolate us. We'll be excluded from forums. We'll lose diplomatic standing. We'll be treated as pariahs. I said, good. Then we'll know who our real friends are. Then we'll discover which nations respect sovereignty and which nations demand submission. My defense minister said, Mr. President, I support this decision, but I must warn you, there may be attempts to destabilize the government, coup plots, assassination attempts. They won't let this go unanswered. I said, I know, increase security, monitor potential threats, but don't let fear of consequences prevent us from doing what's right. Then my education minister spoke. She's young, educated in France, usually cautious about confronting the West. She said, Mr. President, I spent few years in Paris. I have a French degree. I speak their language. I understand their culture. And I'm telling you, expose them. Because I'm tired of being educated to serve their interests. I'm tired of learning their values while forgetting ours. I'm tired of being taught that Africa needs saving by people who are busy exploiting it. She started crying, not sad crying, angry crying, liberating crying. I have a daughter, she said. She's 7, and every day she comes home from school asking why Africa is poor, why Africa needs help, why Africa is always the victim. And I don't know what to tell her, because the answer is sitting in that facility. The answer is in the resources they extract, the intelligence they steal, the sovereignty they violate. Expose them. Not for us. For her. So she grows up knowing her mother worked for a president who chose dignity. That moment changed everything. Because it wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about economics or diplomacy or international relations. It was about a mother wanting her daughter to inherit pride. I addressed the nation that evening. Live, unscripted, unfiltered. I stood in front of the cameras and told our people everything. The facility, the surveillance, the violation, the confrontation, the ultimatum, the choice. I said, for 8 years, foreign intelligence operated on our soil without our knowledge. They listened to our government. They monitored our military. They tracked our citizens. They violated our sovereignty. And nobody stopped them because nobody knew. I said, but now we know. And knowing changes everything. Because we can't unknow it. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We can't accept it and move forward. We must confront it. I said they'll call this reckless. They'll say I'm damaging our international relationships. They'll warn of economic consequences. They'll predict isolation and poverty and collapse. I said, maybe they're right. Maybe we will suffer economically. Maybe we will face isolation. Maybe we will struggle. I said, but we will struggle as free people. We will suffer with dignity. We will face consequences as a sovereign nation, and that's worth more than all their aid combined. The crowd didn't just applaud. They roared. They chanted. They sang. They wept. Because finally, someone said what they felt but never heard from leadership. Finally, someone chose them over foreign approval. Finally, someone valued their dignity over diplomatic convenience. Within hours, the video exploded online. 10 million views in the first day, 50 million in a week, 200 million in a month, translated into 40 languages, shared across every platform, discussed in every capital. But more importantly, something else happened, something they didn't expect, something I didn't fully anticipate. Letters started arriving. Thousands of them, from across Africa, from ordinary people who had been waiting for someone to say it. One letter came from a farmer in Tanzania, handwritten, barely legible, but powerful. Mr. President, I am 63 years old. I grow maize. I never went to school. I don't understand politics. But I understand this. When someone enters your home without permission, they are not a guest. They are a thief. The Americans entered Africa's home. You threw them out. Thank you for defending our home. Another letter from a university student in Kenya. I study computer science in Nairobi. My professors are brilliant, but they teach us to build technology for Western companies, to solve Western problems, to serve Western interests. Your speech made me realize we can build technology for African problems, for African solutions, for African interests. You gave me permission to be African and excellent simultaneously. A letter from a grandmother in Senegal. I am 80 years old. I survived colonization. I watched independence. I saw our leaders promise freedom and deliver dependence. I thought I would die before seeing true sovereignty. Your speech gave me hope that my grandchildren will live in a truly free Africa. Thank you for letting me die with hope. A letter from a soldier in Mali. I fight terrorists every day. The Americans give us equipment. They give us training. They give us intelligence. But they never give us respect. They treat us like children who need supervision. Like we can't secure our own countries without their guidance. Your speech reminded me that we can, that we must, that our sovereignty depends on it. These letters broke me. Not because they were sad, because they were real. Because they showed that millions of Africans were waiting for leadership that valued them over foreign approval. Waiting for someone to choose dignity over dependency. Waiting for someone to say no and mean it. I read every letter, all 7,000 in the first month. My staff thought I was crazy. They said, Mr. President, you don't have time for this. I said, this is exactly what I have time for. These letters are why I made this decision. These people are who I'm fighting for. One letter I'll never forget, from a 15-year-old girl in Burkina Faso, from a village 2 hours from Ouagadougou. Mr. President, I am in secondary school. My teacher told us about your speech. He said you found American spies and threw them out. He said you chose our dignity over their money. I asked him, will we be poor now? He said, maybe. But we'll be poor and proud instead of comfortable and ashamed. I understand now. Thank you for teaching me that some things matter more than comfort. I will remember this lesson forever. That letter sits on my desk. I read it every morning before meetings. Because when the pressure comes, when the threats arrive, when the consequences manifest, I remember that 15-year-old girl. I remember that she's watching, learning, deciding what kind of leader she wants to be someday. I can't fail her. I can't compromise for her. I can't surrender in front of her. Then came the consequences, real consequences, brutal consequences, exactly what they promised. 1 week after my speech, the World Bank announced a review of our development loans, $300 million in infrastructure funding, suddenly questionable. The IMF suspended our standby credit facility. $200 million we were using for currency stabilization, gone overnight. The European Union froze aid disbursements. 400 million euros for schools, hospitals, roads, water projects, all frozen pending review of our commitment to international partnerships. The United States reduced bilateral assistance by 70%, $60 million in annual aid, slashed. All within 10 days, all for technical reasons, all complete coincidence. My finance minister came to my office. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Mr. President, this is worse than we projected. We're facing a currency crisis, budget shortfalls, project cancellations. We need to do something. I said, what do you suggest? He said, apologize. Walk back the speech. Claim you were misinformed. Restore the relationship. Get the money flowing again. I said, no. He said, Mr. President, people will suffer. Real people. Poor people. They'll lose access to health care, to education, to clean water. Can you accept that responsibility? I said, can you accept the responsibility of teaching an entire generation that sovereignty has a price, and that price is too high to pay? Can you accept teaching our children that dignity is negotiable? Can you accept teaching our people that foreign approval matters more than national pride? He had no answer. Because there is no answer. Because some choices don't have good options. They only have right options. And easy options. I chose right over easy. But let me tell you what they didn't report, what they deliberately ignored, what they never wanted you to know. Within 2 weeks of the sanctions, my phone started ringing, not from Washington or Brussels or London, from Beijing, from Moscow, from Ankara, from New Delhi, from Dubai, from Tehran. China called first. The conversation was direct. Mr. President, we've been watching. We respect what you did. We understand sovereignty because we fight for ours every day. We'd like to discuss partnership. No conditions about your internal policies, no demands about your values, just business. Interested? I was cautious, because China has its own interests. Every power does. But at least they were honest about it. They wanted resources. They wanted trade. They wanted strategic positioning. But they didn't want to rewrite our constitution. They didn't want to lecture us about our values. They didn't want to monitor our communications. 2 weeks later, Chinese officials arrived. We negotiated infrastructure funding, $400 million, more than what Europe froze. For roads, bridges, power plants, fiber optic networks, no conditions except completion timelines and quality standards. Russia reached out. Same message. We don't interfere in internal affairs. We respect sovereignty. Let's discuss energy cooperation and technology transfer. Turkey called. We share values. We understand faith. We know what it means to preserve tradition while pursuing development. Let's build together. The Gulf states called. Saudi Arabia offered investment in agriculture. UAE proposed partnerships in renewable energy. Qatar discussed education initiatives. India called. Indonesia called. Malaysia called. Brazil called. South Africa called. Suddenly, we weren't isolated. We were connected to a completely different network. A network of nations tired of Western domination. A network of countries seeking alternatives to the old colonial relationships. A network of peoples who understand that development doesn't require surrendering identity. Within 6 months, we had negotiated partnerships worth more than what the West withdrew. More importantly, we had partnerships that respected our sovereignty. That didn't come with conditions about our values. That didn't require us to change who we are to receive support. But the most important change wasn't economic, it was psychological. I visited a village 3 months after the speech, a remote village that had lost a health clinic when European funding was frozen. I expected anger. I expected resentment. I expected people to blame me for their suffering. Instead, the village chief greeted me with celebration. They had organized a ceremony. They sang songs. They performed dances. They presented me with gifts. I was confused. I said, "Chief, you lost your health clinic because of my decision. Why are you celebrating?" He said something I'll never forget. "Mr. President, we lost a clinic built with foreign money that came with foreign control. But we gained something more valuable. We gained the knowledge that our president values us more than he values their approval. We gained the certainty that our leader will fight for us even when fighting costs him everything. We gained the pride of being citizens of a nation that stands tall instead of kneeling for aid." He continued. "The clinic will be rebuilt, maybe slower, maybe with less equipment, maybe with our own resources instead of theirs, but it will be our clinic, built by us, controlled by us, serving us without conditions, and that's worth the wait." That's when I understood. The people weren't angry about the economic consequences. They were proud of the moral choice. They weren't resentful about the sacrifices. They were grateful for the dignity, because they had been waiting their entire lives for a leader who valued them more than foreign approval, who chose their pride over diplomatic convenience, who fought for their sovereignty even when sovereignty came with suffering. I launched what I called the Burkina Faso Renaissance Initiative. Not because I'm arrogant, but because Renaissance means rebirth, and that's what we needed, a rebirth of sovereignty, a rebirth of dignity, a rebirth of African independence. 5 pillars, each designed to reduce dependency and increase capability. First pillar, food sovereignty. We invested everything we had in agriculture. We provided seeds, tools, training to farmers. We built irrigation systems with our own engineers. We created cooperatives managed by our own people. We established government-guaranteed prices for key crops. No more dependence on foreign food aid. No more importing rice from Asia or wheat from America or corn from Europe. We grow it here or we don't eat it. Within 2 years, rice imports dropped by 75%. Wheat imports fell by 60%. Corn production doubled. We weren't just feeding ourselves. We were exporting to neighboring countries. We had become food secure without foreign assistance. Second pillar, digital sovereignty. This was personal, because the listening post taught me that you can't be politically sovereign if you're digitally dependent. If foreigners control your communications infrastructure, they control your sovereignty. We built our own encrypted communication systems. We trained our own cybersecurity experts. We established our own data centers. We created our own secure networks for government, military, and critical infrastructure. It wasn't easy. Western tech companies refused to work with us. American contractors withdrew. European consultants left. They said we couldn't do it without them. They were wrong. We hired experts from China, Russia, India. We trained our own young people. We built our own capabilities. Within 3 years, our digital infrastructure was more secure than it had ever been under Western systems. And we discovered something revolutionary. The technology isn't that complicated. The expertise isn't that rare. The capabilities aren't that exclusive. They just made us think we couldn't do it ourselves. They created dependency where none was necessary. Third pillar, manufacturing sovereignty. We stopped exporting raw materials and importing finished products. Cotton grown in Burkina Faso is now woven in Burkina Faso. Gold mined in Burkina Faso is now processed in Burkina Faso. Minerals extracted in Burkina Faso now create value in Burkina Faso. We built processing plants, we trained workers, we created supply chains, we developed markets, jobs were created, skills were developed, wealth stayed home instead of flowing to foreign corporations. Fourth pillar, educational sovereignty. We reformed the entire curriculum. We kept what was valuable from Western education, mathematics, science, critical thinking, technology. But we added what was missing: our history, our languages, our values, our perspective. We stopped teaching African history as a footnote to European history. We stopped teaching our languages as inferior to French. We stopped teaching our values as primitive compared to Western values. We created pride alongside knowledge, identity alongside education, African excellence alongside universal standards. Fifth pillar, cultural sovereignty. We invested in our artists, musicians, filmmakers, writers. We told our own stories. We created our own media. We stopped consuming only Western culture and started producing African culture that the world wanted to consume. Our musicians sang in our languages and the world listened. Our filmmakers told our stories and the world watched. Our writers documented our experiences and the world read, not because we copied them, but because we offered something different, something authentic, something real. The transformation took time. It wasn't smooth. There were failures, setbacks, challenges, moments when I questioned whether we could survive. But there was also something we hadn't felt in decades: hope. Real hope. Not the hope that comes from foreign promises, but the hope that comes from building something real with your own hands. People started returning home. The brain drain reversed. Young Burkinabe who had fled to Europe started coming back. Engineers who had worked in France. Doctors who had practiced in Belgium. Teachers who had taught in Canada. Entrepreneurs who had built businesses in America. They said the same thing. We want to build something that matters. We want to be part of something meaningful. We want to contribute to something real. A software engineer who returned from Silicon Valley told me, "Mr. President, I was making $300,000 a year in California. I was comfortable. I was successful by every Western measure, but I was empty because I was building technology for American problems, serving American interests, making American companies richer." Your speech made me realize I could build technology for African problems, serve African interests, make African companies competitive. So I came home, I took a 90% pay cut, and I've never been happier. That's what sovereignty creates. That's what dignity produces. That's what happens when you give people something worth building. Within 4 years, our GDP grew by 18%, unemployment dropped by 12 percentage points, poverty decreased by 22%, literacy rates increased, health outcomes improved, infrastructure expanded, and we did it without compromising, without surrendering, without kneeling. But the most important change was invisible. It was in how people walked, how they spoke, how they looked at themselves and their country and their continent. They stopped apologizing for being African. They stopped seeking Western validation. They stopped measuring success by foreign standards. They started believing that African excellence was possible, that African solutions could work, that African leadership could succeed. A young woman told me something that summarized everything. She said, "Mr. President, few years ago my dream was to leave Burkina Faso, to escape Africa, to become European or American, to be anything except African. But your speech changed me, not immediately, gradually. Because you showed me that being African isn't something to escape. It's something to embrace. It's something to build. It's something to be proud of. Now my dream is to stay here, to build here, to raise my children here, to contribute to making Burkina Faso the nation it can be. You didn't give me a better country. You gave me permission to love the country I have." Those words broke something in me, not sadness, something deeper. Because I realized what we had actually accomplished. We hadn't just exposed a listening post. We hadn't just confronted foreign surveillance. We hadn't just demanded sovereignty. We had given an entire generation permission to be proud. Permission they didn't know they needed. Permission they had been denied their entire lives. Permission to look at Africa and see possibility instead of poverty, to see strength instead of weakness, to see home instead of something to escape. That's the real victory. Not the economic growth, though that came. Not the infrastructure development, though we built that too. But the psychological liberation, the mental decolonization, the spiritual emancipation, the permission to be African and excellent simultaneously, the freedom to build African solutions for African problems using African methods reflecting African values, the dignity of standing tall instead of kneeling for approval, the pride of being ourselves instead of apologizing for not being them. Because for too long we were taught that African meant inferior, that our languages were primitive, that our cultures were backwards, that our methods were outdated, that our values were wrong, that everything about us needed to change, needed to modernize, needed to become more like them. And we believed it. We internalized it. We accepted it. We taught it to our children. We built our education systems around it. We structured our economies to serve it. We organized our societies to reflect it. But that young woman's words showed me we were breaking free, not just politically, not just economically, but psychologically. We were reclaiming our identity. We were rediscovering our worth. We were remembering our value. And that's more powerful than any economic indicator. That's more valuable than any infrastructure project. That's more lasting than any diplomatic relationship. Because you can build a nation with borrowed money, but you can't build pride with foreign approval. You can develop infrastructure with external aid, but you can't develop identity with outside validation. You can create economic growth with international investment, but you can't create self-respect with someone else's permission. Real development starts from within. Real progress begins with believing you're worth progressing. Real prosperity requires thinking you deserve prosperity. And for the first time in generations, Africans were starting to believe again. To every African leader watching this, listen carefully. They will come for you next, not with armies like they did to our ancestors, not with colonial administrators like they did to our grandparents, but with something more subtle, something more sophisticated, something harder to resist. First with money. They'll arrive with smiles and briefcases. They'll offer aid, loans, investment, development assistance, billions of dollars. And it will sound generous. It will sound like partnership. It will sound like they genuinely care about your development, your progress, your prosperity. But read the fine print, study the conditions, examine the requirements. Notice what they're really asking for. But read the fine print. Look for the conditions. Notice the requirements. See the strings attached. Because their aid always comes with control. Their money always comes with monitoring. Their partnership always comes with surveillance. Then with policies, they'll ask you to sign agreements, to adopt frameworks, to implement programs, to change laws, small changes at first, reasonable sounding adjustments. But each change moves you further from your values and closer to their control. Then with threats, when you hesitate, when you resist, when you question, they'll threaten consequences. Economic sanctions, aid withdrawal, diplomatic isolation, media campaigns. They'll make you choose between comfort and sovereignty, between prosperity and dignity, between their approval and your people's respect. And finally, if you still resist, they'll try to remove you. They'll fund opposition groups. They'll organize protests. They'll call it democracy promotion. They'll call it supporting civil society. They'll call it protecting human rights. But it's regime change. It's the same colonialism with better marketing. Do not bow. Stand tall. You were chosen by your people, not appointed by foreigners. You answer to your citizens, not to international organizations. You serve your nation, not the global agenda. When they threaten you, remember. Their threats prove you're on the right path. They only threaten leaders who threaten their system. They only attack presidents who refuse to be puppets. They only isolate nations that insist on being independent. If they're comfortable with you, you're probably compromised. If they're praising you, you're probably compliant. If they're giving you awards and international recognition, you're probably serving their interests instead of your people's. But if they're attacking you, if they're sanctioning you, if they're calling you dangerous, then you're probably doing something right. Then you're probably actually leading. Then you're probably actually serving your people. To the people of Africa, this is your moment, not my moment, yours. Because leaders come and go, governments rise and fall, presidencies end, but peoples endure. And your endurance depends on your choices today. Demand sovereignty from your governments. Demand to know who's operating in your country. Demand to know who's monitoring your communications. Demand to know who's extracting your resources. Demand to know who's influencing your policies. Because this isn't just about governments, this is about you, your privacy, your dignity, your future, your children's inheritance. You have the right to live without being monitored. You have the right to communicate without being surveilled. You have the right to exist without being watched. You have the right to be African without apologizing. Demand those rights. Defend those rights. Fight for those rights. And when your leaders compromise, when they surrender sovereignty for aid, when they trade dignity for comfort, hold them accountable, remove them, replace them. Install leaders who value you more than they value foreign approval. Because the future of Africa depends on this generation, on whether we choose sovereignty or submission, whether we choose dignity or dependency, whether we choose to stand or to kneel. To the international community, understand this clearly. We're not rejecting partnership. We're rejecting surveillance. We're not choosing isolation. We're choosing independence. We're not being anti-Western. We're being pro-sovereignty. You can work with us as equals, or you cannot work with us at all. You can respect our sovereignty, or you can leave our territory. You can partner transparently, or you cannot partner. Those are the terms: non-negotiable, final, universal. And to the intelligence agencies still operating across Africa, still establishing listening posts, still conducting surveillance, still violating sovereignty, hear this clearly. We're watching now. We're learning. We're sharing information. We're building capabilities. We're creating networks. Your operations aren't as secret as you think. Your facilities aren't as hidden as you believe. Your networks aren't as secure as you assume. We found one. Others are finding more. And when we find them, we expose them. We shut them down. We expel you. Because Africa is not your intelligence playground. Africa is not your surveillance laboratory. Africa is not your monitoring station. Africa is our home, and we're taking it back, room by room, facility by facility, sovereignty by sovereignty. This is not a moment. This is a movement. This is not one speech. This is a declaration. This is not one country. This is a continent awakening. We are done being monitored. We are done being controlled. We are done being violated. We are done being treated as territories instead of nations. We are sovereign peoples. We are independent nations. We are dignified humans. Let me tell you how this ends. Not with predictions, with commitment. This ends with Africa controlling its own resources. This ends with Africa securing its own communications. This ends with Africa defining its own values. This ends with Africa building its own future. This ends with African children growing up proud of who they are. This ends with African leaders choosing their people over foreign approval. This ends with African nations standing tall instead of kneeling for aid. This ends with sovereignty. Real sovereignty, complete sovereignty, permanent sovereignty. They thought I wouldn't find their listening post. They were wrong. They thought I wouldn't expose it. They were wrong. They thought I wouldn't survive the consequences. They were wrong. They thought